Syme struck his hands together. "How true that is," he cried. "I've felt it from my boyhood, but never could state the verbal antithesis. The common criminal is a bad man, but at least he is, as it were, a conditional good man. He says that if only a certain obstacle be removed, say a wealthy uncle, he is then prepared to accept the universe and to praise God. He is a reformer, but not an anarchist. He wishes to cleanse the edifice, but not to destroy it. But the evil philosopher is not trying to alter things, but to annihilate them. Yes, the modern world has retained all those parts of police work which are really oppressive and ignominious. The harrying of the poor, the spying upon the unfortunate. It has given up its more dignified work, the punishment of powerful traitors in the state and powerful heresiarchs in the church. The moderns say we must not punish heretics. My only doubt is whether we have a right to punish anybody else." "But this is absurd," cried the policeman, clasping his hands with an excitement uncommon in persons of his figure and costume. "But it is intolerable. I don't know what you're doing, but you're wasting your life. You shall join our special army against anarchy. Their armies are on our frontiers. Their bolt is ready to fall. A moment more and you may lose the glory of working with us, perhaps the glory of dying with the last heroes of the world." "It is a chance not to be missed, certainly," assented Syme. "But still I do not quite understand. I know as well as anybody that the modern world is full of lawless little men and mad little movements. But beastly as they are, they generally have the one merit of disagreeing with each other. How can you talk of their leading one army or hurling one bolt? What is this anarchy?" "Do not confuse it," replied the constable, "with those chance dynamite outbreaks from Russia or from Ireland, which are really the outbreaks of oppressed, if mistaken, men. This is a vast philosophic movement consisting of an outer and an inner ring. You might even call the outer ring the laity and the inner ring the priesthood. I prefer to call the outer ring the innocent section, the inner ring the supremely guilty section. The outer ring, the main mass of their supporters, are merely anarchists, that is, men who believe that rules and formulas have destroyed human happiness. They believe that all the evil results of human crime are the results of the system that has called it crime. They do not believe that the crime creates the punishment. They believe that the punishment has created the crime. They believe that if a man seduced 7 women, he would naturally walk away as blameless as the flowers of spring. They believe that if a man picked a pocket, he would naturally feel exquisitely good. These I call the innocent section." "Oh," said Syme. "Naturally, therefore, these people talk about a happy time coming, the paradise of the future, mankind freed from the bondage of vice and the bondage of virtue, and so on. And so also the men of the inner circle speak, the sacred priesthood. They also speak to applauding crowds of the happiness of the future and of mankind freed at last. But in their mouths," and the policeman lowered his voice, "in their mouths these happy phrases have a horrible meaning. They are under no illusions. They are too intellectual to think that man upon this earth can ever be quite free of original sin and the struggle, and they mean death. When they say that mankind shall be free at last, they mean that mankind shall commit suicide. When they talk of a paradise without right or wrong, they mean the grave. They have but 2 objects, to destroy first humanity and then themselves. That is why they throw bombs instead of firing pistols. The innocent rank and file are disappointed because the bomb has not killed the king. But the high priesthood are happy because it has killed somebody." "How can I join you?" asked Syme with a sort of passion. "I know for a fact that there is a vacancy at the moment," said the policeman, "as I have the honor to be somewhat in the confidence of the chief of whom I have spoken. You should really come and see him, or rather, I should not say see him, nobody ever sees him, but you can talk to him if you like." "Telephone?" inquired Syme with interest. "No," said the policeman placidly. "He has a fancy for always sitting in a pitch-dark room. He says it makes his thoughts brighter. Do come along." Somewhat dazed and considerably excited, Syme allowed himself to be led to a side door in the long row of buildings of Scotland Yard. Almost before he knew what he was doing, he had been passed through the hands of about 4 intermediate officials and was suddenly shown into a room, the abrupt blackness of which startled him like the blaze of light. It was not the ordinary darkness in which forms can be faintly traced. It was like going suddenly stone blind. "Are you the new recruit?" asked a heavy voice. And in some strange way, though there was not the shadow of a shape in the gloom, Syme knew 2 things. First, that it came from a man of massive stature, and second, that the man had his back to him. "Are you the new recruit?" said the invisible chief, who seemed to have heard all about it. "All right, you are engaged." Syme, quite swept off his feet, made a feeble fight against this irrevocable phrase. "I really have no experience," he began. "No one has any experience," said the other, "of the Battle of Armageddon." "But I am really unfit. You are willing, that is enough," said the unknown. "Well, really," said Syme, "I don't know any profession of which mere willingness is the final test." "I do," said the other. "Martyrs. I am condemning you to death. Good day." Thus it was that when Gabriel Syme came out again into the crimson light of evening, in his shabby black hat and shabby lawless cloak, he came out a member of the new detective corps for the frustration of the great conspiracy. Acting under the advice of his friend the policeman, who was professionally inclined to neatness, he trimmed his hair and beard, bought a good hat, clad himself in an exquisite summer suit of light blue-gray, with a pale yellow flower in the buttonhole, and in short became that elegant and rather insupportable person whom Gregory had first encountered in the little garden of Saffron Park. Before he finally left the police PR discoloration nemesis, his friend provided him with a small blue card on which was written "The Last Crusade," and a number, the sign of his official authority. He put this carefully in his upper waistcoat pocket, lit a cigarette, and went forth to track and fight the enemy in all the drawing rooms of London. Where his adventure ultimately led him we have already seen. At about 1:30 on a February night, he found himself steaming in a small tug up the silent Thames, armed with sword stick and revolver, the duly elected Thursday of the Central Council of Anarchists. When Syme stepped out onto the steam tug, he had a singular sensation of stepping out into something entirely new. Not merely into the landscape of a new land, but even into the landscape of a new planet. This was mainly due to the insane yet solid decision of that evening, though partly also to an entire change in the weather and the sky since he entered the little tavern some 2 hours before. Every trace of the passionate plumage of the cloudy sunset had been swept away, and a naked moon stood in a naked sky. The moon was so strong and full that, by a paradox often to be noticed, it seemed like a weaker sun. It gave not the sense of bright moonshine, but rather of a dead daylight. Over the whole landscape lay a luminous and unnatural discoloration, as of that disastrous twilight which Milton spoke of as shed by the sun in eclipse, so that Syme fell easily into his first thought, that he was actually on some other and emptier planet, which circled round some sadder star. But the more he felt this glittering desolation in the moonlit land, the more his own chivalric folly glowed in the night like a great fire. Even the common things he carried with him, the food and the brandy and the loaded pistol, took on exactly that concrete and material poetry which a child feels when he takes a gun upon a journey or a bun with him to bed. The sword stick and the brandy flask, though in themselves only the tools of morbid conspirators, became the expressions of his own more healthy romance. The sword stick became almost the sword of chivalry, and the brandy the wine of the stirrup cup. For even the most dehumanized modern fantasies depend on some older and simpler figure. The adventurers may be mad, but the adventurer must be sane. The dragon without St. George would not even be grotesque. So this inhuman landscape was only imaginative by the presence of a man really human. To Syme's exaggerative mind, the bright, bleak houses and terraces by the Times looked as empty as the mountains of the moon. But even the moon is only poetical because there is a man in the moon. The tug was worked by 2 men, and with such toil went comparatively slowly. The clear moon that had lit up Chiswick had gone down by the time that they passed Battersea. And when they came under the enormous bulk of Westminster, day had already begun to break. It broke like the splitting of great bars of lead, showing bars of silver, and these had brightened like white fire when the tug, changing its onward course, turned inward to a large landing stage rather beyond Charing Cross. The great stones of the embankment seemed equally dark and gigantic as Syme looked up at them. They were big and black against the huge white dawn. They made him feel that he was landing on the colossal steps of some Egyptian palace. And indeed, the thing suited his mood, for he was, in his own mind, mounting to attack the solid thrones of horrible and heathen kings. He leapt out of the boat onto one slimy step and stood, a dark and slender figure, amid the enormous masonry. The 2 men in the tug put her off again and turned up steam. The 2 men in the tug put her off again and turned upstream. They had never spoken a word. Chapter 5, The Feast of Fear. At first, the large stone stair seemed to Syme as deserted as a pyramid. But before he reached the top, he had realized that there was a man leaning over the parapet of the embankment and looking out across the river. As a figure, he was quite conventional, clad in a silk hat and frock coat of the more formal type of fashion. He had a red flower in his buttonhole. As Syme drew nearer to him step by step, he did not even move a hair, and Syme could come close enough to notice even in the dim, pale morning light that his face was long, pale, and intellectual, and ended in a small triangular tuft of dark beard at the very point of the chin, all else being clean-shaven. This scrap of hair almost seemed a mere oversight. The rest of the face was of the type that is best shaven, clear-cut, ascetic, and in its way noble. Syme drew closer and closer, noting all this, and still the figure did not stir. At first, an instinct had told Syme that this was the man whom he was meant to meet. Then, seeing that the man made no sign, he had concluded that he was not. And now again he had come back to a certainty that the man had something to do with his mad adventure. For the man remained more still than would have been natural if a stranger had come so close. He was as motionless as a waxwork, and got on the nerves somewhat in the same way. Syme looked again and again at the pale, dignified, and delicate face, and the face still looked blankly across the river. Then he took out of his pocket the note from Buttons proving his election and put it before that sad and beautiful face. Then the man smiled, and his smile was a shock, for it was all on one side, going up in the right cheek and down in the left. There was nothing, rationally speaking, to scare anyone about this. Many people have this nervous trick of a crooked smile, and in many it is even attractive. But in all Syme's circumstances, with the dark dawn and the deadly errand and the loneliness on the great dripping stones, there was something unnerving in it. There was the silent river and the silent man, a man of even classic face, and there was the last nightmare touch that his smile suddenly went wrong. The spasm of smile was instantaneous, and the man's face dropped at once into its harmonious melancholy. He spoke without further explanation or inquiry, like a man speaking to an old colleague. "If we walk up towards Leicester Square," he said, "we shall just be in time for breakfast. Sunday always insists on an early breakfast. Have you had any sleep?" "No," said Syme. "Nor have I," answered the man in an ordinary tone. "I shall try to get to bed after breakfast." He spoke with casual civility, but in an utterly dead voice that contradicted the fanaticism of his face. It seemed almost as if all friendly words were to him lifeless conveniences, and that his only life was hate. After a pause, the man spoke again. Of course, the secretary of the branch told you everything that can be told, but the one thing that can never be told is the last notion of the president, for his notions grow like a tropical forest. So in case you don't know, I'd better tell you that he is carrying out his notion of concealing ourselves by not concealing ourselves to the most extraordinary lengths just now. Originally, of course, we met in a cell underground, just as your branch does. Then Sunday made us take a private room at an ordinary restaurant. He said that if you didn't seem to be hiding, nobody hunted you out. Well, he's the only man on earth I know, but sometimes I really think that his huge brain is going a little mad in its old age, for now we flaunt ourselves before the public. We have our breakfast on a balcony, if you please, overlooking Leicester Square. And what do the people say? Asked Syme. It's quite simple what they say, answered his guide. They say we are a lot of jolly gentlemen who pretend they are anarchists. It seems to me a very clever idea, said Syme. Clever, God blast your impudence. Clever, cried out the other in a sudden, shrill voice, which was as startling and discordant as his crooked smile. When you've seen Sunday for a split second, you'll leave off calling him clever. With this, they emerged out of a narrow street and saw the early sunlight filling Leicester Square. It will never be known, I suppose, why this square itself should look so alien and in some ways so continental. It will never be known whether it was the foreign look that attracted the foreigners or the foreigners who gave it the foreign look. But on this particular morning, the effect seemed singularly bright and clear. Between the open square and the sunlit leaves and the statue and the Saracenic outlines of the Alhambra, it looked the replica of some French or even Spanish public place. And this effect increased in Syme the sensation, which in many shapes he had had through the whole adventure, the eerie sensation of having strayed into a new world. As a fact, he had bought bad cigars round Leicester Square ever since he was a boy. But as he turned that corner and saw the trees and the Moorish cupolas, he could have sworn that he was turning into an unknown place, something or other in some foreign town. At one corner of the square there projected a kind of angle of a prosperous but quiet hotel, the bulk of which belonged to a street behind. In the wall there was one large French window, probably the window of a large coffee room, and outside this window, almost literally overhanging the square, was a formidably buttressed balcony, big enough to contain a dining table. In fact, it did contain a dining table, or more strictly, a breakfast table. And round the breakfast table, glowing in the sunlight and evident to the street, were a group of noisy and talkative men, all dressed in the insolence of fashion, with white waistcoats and expensive buttonholes. Some of their jokes could almost be heard across the square. Then the grave secretary gave his unnatural smile, and Syme knew that this boisterous breakfast party was the secret conclave of the European dynamiters. Then, as Syme continued to stare at them, he saw something that he had not seen before. He had not seen it literally because it was too large to see. At the nearest end of the balcony, blocking up a great part of the perspective, was the back of a great mountain of a man. When Syme had seen him, his first thought was that the weight of him must break down the balcony of stone. His vastness did not lie only in the fact that he was abnormally tall and quite incredibly fat. This man was planned enormously in his original proportions, like a statue carved deliberately as colossal. His head, crowned with white hair as seen from behind, looked bigger than a head ought to be. The ears that stood out from it looked larger than human ears. He was enlarged terribly to scale, and this sense of size was so staggering that when Syme saw him, all the other figures seemed quite suddenly to dwindle and become dwarfish. They were still sitting there as before with their flowers and frock coats, but now it looked as if the big man was entertaining 5 children to tea. As Syme and the guide approached the side door of the hotel, a waiter came out smiling with every tooth in his head. "The gentlemen are up there, sir," he said. "They do talk and they do laugh at what they talk. They do say they will throw bombs at the king." and the waiter hurried away with a napkin over his arm, much pleased with the singular frivolity of the gentleman upstairs. The two men mounted the stairs in silence. Syme had never thought of asking whether the monstrous man who almost filled and broke the balcony was the great president of whom the others stood in awe. He knew it was so with an unaccountable but instantaneous certainty. Syme, indeed, was one of those men who are open to all the more nameless psychological influences in a degree a little dangerous to mental health. Utterly devoid of fear and physical dangers, he was a great deal too sensitive to the smell of spiritual evil. Twice already that night, little unmeaning things had peeped out at him almost pruriently and given him a sense of drawing nearer and nearer to the headquarters of hell, and this sense became overpowering as he drew nearer to the great president. The form it took was a childish and yet hateful fancy. As he walked across the inner room towards the balcony, the large face of Sunday grew larger and larger, and Syme was gripped with a fear that when he was quite close, the face would be too big to be possible, and that he would scream aloud. He remembered that as a child he would not look at the mask of Memnon in the British Museum because it was a face and so large. By an effort, braver than that of leaping over a cliff, he went to an empty seat at the breakfast table and sat down. The men greeted him with good-humored raillery as if they had always known him. He sobered himself a little by looking at their conventional coats and solid, shining coffee pot. Then he looked again at Sunday. His face was very large, but it was still possible to humanity.